from a membership and supporter perspective, we're really pleased with the fixture. We've got a really good mix of home games with 4 Saturday nights, a Friday night, and a couple of Saturday twilights. From an interstate perspective, we've got sort of 5 games in Melbourne, which is great for our Victorian fans and our people who also like to travel. We've got the Friday night Easter game, which is terrific, and also commercially we think we've got a really good draw. So all in all, we're really pleased with the outcome, and of course we've got the Shanghai game on June the 2nd in Shanghai for the 3rd time against St Kilda, which we're really looking forward to. So all in all, we're really pleased with the fixture from a member, supporter and commercial perspective. I'll hand over to Chris and he can give you a bit of an overview from a footy sense.
Then up for you then.
Guys can ask some questions if you'd like.
Would you rather us do that straight away?
Yeah, I'm happy to do whatever you want, Theo.
You feel the showdown's been cast aside by not being given a Friday night?
I think that's more of a commercial thing, but from my perspective, we're pleased from a footy standpoint with the draw. Clearly there's a view around the showdowns, whether they should be a national spectacle on Friday nights. My personal view is yes, but overall, football-wise, we're pleased with the draw.
There was discussion, I don't know who's best to answer this, there was discussion that when the fixture was delayed by a day, initially in the draft that there was a showdown penciled in for Friday night. Was that the case at all, or was there never any talk?
Certainly not as far as we were aware, no. So we've got, I think both showdowns are on a Saturday night. Last year they both had more than 50,000. It'll be a great showcase game. Absolutely, the game deserves to be on the national stage, but we understand the complexities of trying to put the fixture together as well. So we're delighted with the outcome.
Will it be something that you push towards perhaps next year, in the coming years, to hopefully get one on Friday night, do you think?
Whether it's a Friday night or a Saturday night, it's that standalone on a national stage. There's no doubt that we all love it. Deserves to be on the national stage. So that's something we'll keep pushing. But at the same time, we also understand the complexities that we're trying to put the fixture together. And we really appreciate the way the AFL have engaged us in this process. And like I said, we're delighted with the outcome.
Is there anything you didn't get either of you from your perspective? Any things you didn't get that you would like?
No, our number one fixture request is Anzac Round. We've hosted Anzac Day now for 16 years in a row. It's really important from a partnership perspective for us in terms of the RSL and also the defence community. So a Friday night Anzac Round game against North Melbourne is fantastic as our number one priority. More games on Saturday nights for our members and our supporters, which is their number one priority, which again the AFL have been able to achieve for us. And of course the game in Shanghai in June again, which is terrific. So like I said, all in all, we're really appreciative of the fixture that we've got.
Chris, Champion Data, we're just up with the Crows. Champion Data has suggested they've got a relatively easy draw, if there is such a thing. Are you happy, I guess, going into next year with how your draw looks as far as your finals aspirations?
Yeah, I mean the data's interesting, isn't it? It doesn't normally play out in terms of the way that the season pans out. There's no easy games in the AFL competition. You've got to play who the AFL end up giving you. Where we've got no issues with the draw. We think it's as Richo said, a fair draw overall. We don't have any issues with day breaks, those types of things. We're really pleased with where we're at.
Were there any requests specifically? Obviously Richard touched on Anzac Day and China. Was there anything about night games or breaks that?
Not from a footy perspective. I mean, we understand that the draw is largely a commercial thing. There are some things that we ask the AFL to keep in mind which aren't any different to what the other clubs would be doing, and that's day breaks, those types of things. There were talks about potential for 5-day breaks. We don't have any of those, so without sounding boring, we're pretty pleased with where we've ended up from a footy standpoint.
About a travel perspective, anything else that caught your eye?
No, there's not, and even then, you've got to put it into context, don't you? The Western Australian teams travel, every second week, just as we do. We're always mindful of the travel loads, and we manage that around training. So no issues there. I mean, obviously we go to Tasmania and then off to Shanghai, which will be two great experiences for the guys.
That Tassie game, a lot of Adelaide fans, they look at a fixture and they go, when are we playing Jab Wingard and whoever we lost last year?
Yep.
Disappointed that's down in Tassie? Would you like to have seen it at the G or at Adelaide Oval?
No, we won't be playing Jab Wingard next year. We'll be playing Hawthorn and we'll be playing North Melbourne when we're going up against Polex. So we're not looking at the specifics of where we play each team. We know that we're most likely to head down to Tasmania to play against Hawthorn as we did last year.
You're saying you're pretty happy with the fixture and how things are looking at the moment, and I guess same with the chance of being boring. What do you think that means then for finals? Do you think that this fixture being so average or good could help for the finals?
As I said earlier, there's no easy games in the AFL competition. I mean, we go into every year, wanting to play finals. That will be no different this year. It's whether the draw is favourable or what at the start of the year. As I said at the start, rarely makes a difference once the teams actually get going. I imagine that not too many people considered West Coast and Collingwood would be the two best teams last year. So it's not an exercise that I go through to have a look at who we're playing twice and whether the draw could have been more advantageous to us. The draw is what it is. We'll come up against the teams every week that we need to, and we'll need to be good enough to beat them.
On a separate issue, the draft's coming up. A lot's been made of your fifth overall pick. I mean, given the amount of talent from South Australia, obviously there's a focus on local talent, but if it so happened, I mean, is there a preference from the club about whether or not you take a local player, or is it just the best player on the board?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, because I know that there's been a lot of talk about us taking the South Australian players. At pick 5, we'll take whoever we think is the best player that's left in the draft, and whether that's a Victorian, whether it's a Tasmanian, whether it's a Queenslander, whoever that will be, we'll take. Of course, being based here in South Australia and wanting to have as many South Australians on your list as you possibly can, it's a consideration, but we're not going to take a South Australian over who we think is the best player to take at that particular point. So, you guys will know the names. We were in a good spot. It'll be fascinating to see how that ends up.
Because you lose on paper at pick 5? Sounds like you can't.
We got to this point because we thought that there were good players at the top of the draft that we wanted to have a crack at. Who ends up in that spot, I don't think the club will be in a position where it's able to lose, because ultimately it's the player that we think is at the very least a fifth best player, and often you get to these points and you might be lucky enough to jag someone that you think is 1 or 2 in the list. So there's certainly an extra layer of complexity to this year's draft that'll be, provide our fans, I'm sure, with some greater interest.
I'm sure your phone is ringing hot during the trade period. You can still trade your picks at the moment, I believe, and up until tonight. Is it in the back of your mind to look at it, or has people been inquiring about it? We'll certainly look at it. I mean, we've got the potential to trade next year's picks into this year's draft if we see the value in doing so. I think that, as I said, will add another layer of interest to see if there's a player who slips in the order that we think is that we rate highly. Well, there's certain things that we can now do to get up earlier in this year's draft that we'll certainly look at. So it's not in the back of our mind, it's in the front of our mind, because we want our list to be as good as it possibly can be.
Do you need to get to pick 3 or 4 to feel a little bit more comfortable about who you will get, to know that you'll get them?
Not really. No. There's so much that could go on right now. I mean, I would imagine that who gets picked at pick 1 will be interesting in itself, because I don't think that's a done deal, and that could affect the next 7 selections rather than just the next 3 or 4. So we'll wait up until the night and we'll make some assessments, but I think it's highly unlikely that we'll end up any higher than what we are. That being said, we're open to looking at the potential as and if need be.
So 5 and 15, that's not too high a price to move up 1 spot. Do you have a view on that?
I think it's highly unlikely that we'll do that.
Richard, are you happy with the club's presence on some major night fixtures as such next year?
Yeah, absolutely. We've got, like I said, 3 Friday nights. We kick off the year in Melbourne on a Saturday at the MCG, which our people love. First 2 home games against 2 big Melbourne clubs in Carlton and Richmond. Saturday twilight early in the year works really well. There's no other community footy at that stage. Then we roll into Friday night, Saturday night. There's a stretch of 3 Friday nights in a row on the national stage with Easter, Anzac Round, and then Collingwood in Melbourne at Marvel. So commercially, it's like I said, for our members and our supporters, we think it's a great draw. It gives them a lot of time slots in their fixture, and that's right around the country. And commercially, it's a really strong draw as well for our partners.
I was going to say those twilight fixtures often, I suppose, the Sunday twilight and the Saturday twilight fans are a little bit cool about it. Are you happy with how you've got the mix of Saturday ones there?
Yeah, we think the mix. Yeah, we think the mix works well because we've got 2 early ones in round 2 and round 4. So, and by that stage, a lot of community sport hasn't started, so that works well. And then I think we have got a Sunday twilight, but it actually falls in school holidays. So again, that works really well for us, for families or people that are travelling.
Good Friday, Richard. Keith said it wasn't really on the radar, given your priorities are Anzac Round and China. What was your reaction to the Good Friday? Yeah,
look, we were surprised, but pleasantly surprised for what it does. I think if you look at what North Melbourne have done and what other codes have done around Good Friday, they've done it really respectfully, and we're really looking forward to get across. Obviously with West Coast there's a fantastic rivalry. Hopefully we can sort of swap it around going over there, but the opportunity to play a standalone game on Good Friday is fantastic for our footy club.
Thanks,
Thanks, guys. Thank you.